Welcome to Awaken Empower TV. I'm your host, Ethan Fox. Today I'm joined by Susie Hansen, an ET experiencer and author of The Dual Soul Connection. Today we speak about her life growing up with extraterrestrial contact and experiences, and also she has an organization that delves into global research in the field of extraterrestrial contact. And so we talk about that, and as well as what some of the different races are like, what the ships are like, what their intentions are in interacting with the human race at this time, and also some possible future direction that we may be going as a global consciousness. So without any further delay, here's Susie Hansen. Hi, Susie. Welcome to Awaken Empower TV. It's a pleasure for me to have you on the show. I'm looking forward to learning a lot about you and also what your life journey has been like and some of the very fascinating things you've learned along the way. So welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Ethan. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I look forward to it.
First, I'd like to learn a little about you, your life experience. I think you were born in New Zealand. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. I was born in a small rural town in New Zealand, in a small family. Had quite a normal childhood in those days, in the 50s and 60s. We spent a lot of time outdoors doing, fishing and climbing and tramping and all the kinds of things that we do in the outdoors in New Zealand. So very outdoor, physical kind of growing up. In my teenage years, I attended college and I played musical instruments, and I was in drama productions, and I sang in choirs and all that kind of thing. I went on to qualify as a school teacher at Teachers College, and I spent 28 years teaching primary and secondary school children, so all children from the age of 5 through to 16. I also qualified as a community grief counsellor and was on a management committee of a local community organisation for about 5 years. Apart from that, of course, I've written a book and done a lot of voluntary kind of work in the community since having stopped my years of teaching. I have 2 sons and a grandchild and a wonderful husband, and we live in a city that's by the sea called Tauranga in New Zealand.
Sounds beautiful. So is it just the one book you've written so far, or I thought you had a second one on the way?
No, I've written one book. I've got 2 more partly finished, and I've written quite a lot of articles for overseas UFO magazines.
Mm-hmm. And you also run an organization now that researches the UFO phenomenon, right?
Yes, I've actually been in the UFO field for 40 years, 41 years at the end of this year. I started when I was 20 years old, and I had a phenomenal experience myself on a lonely country road, and that really precipitated me into investigating UFO sightings and documenting people's accounts of contact in later years in the 70s in New Zealand, when that really began to emerge over here. In the year 2000, I formally formed a nationwide group called UFOCUS NZ Research Network, and we have a staff of 6 and a number of other people throughout New Zealand who work with us to investigate UFO sightings. We have a website and a particular emphasis not only on aviation sightings, military, pilot, commercial pilot, private pilot, air traffic controllers, etc., but also we concentrate on sightings that occur around the time of seismic and volcanic activity in New Zealand. We have a signed agreement of cooperation with CEFAA in Chile, which is the official military aviation civilian group in Chile that looks into UFO sightings. And they also have the same focus as us on aviation sightings and seismic sightings around seismic activity.
What's the significance of seismic activity and volcanic activity and sightings? What's the connection?
Well, it seems to us that someone other than humans is looking at what is happening to the tectonic plates on our planet, and that particularly the movement of the Earth and volcanic activity around the Ring of Fire around the Pacific, on which New Zealand and Chile sit. And we have had some quite phenomenal sightings, not only of light configurations in the sky, but actual craft that have been sighted at the time of major activity in New Zealand. For example, in 2010, and 2011 we had major earthquakes here in New Zealand in the city of Christchurch, which part of Christchurch was just razed to the ground. And we began getting sightings rolling in about 10 days before that earthquake occurred, and it carried on for some weeks afterwards. So there is definitely a link between someone watching the tectonic activity and the earthquakes themselves.
And so in this role as a researcher and with your organization, so what's the website of your organization?
It's www.ufocusnz.org.nz. But I also have my own website, which is www.communicatorlink.com, which is where my book and my sighting experiences, contact experiences are documented.
And as this role as a researcher and your organization, what kind of research do you actually do? What is a typical day that you in your organization?
Okay, we have a number of aviation members on our staff. So we've just lost one; he passed away. But we have air traffic controllers and pilots, etc. So we do concentrate on that. A normal day for us would be documenting whatever sightings come in, and then they may be assigned. I will assign them to an investigator throughout the country, depending on where the sighting was located. That investigator will go out and speak to the person, depending on the amount of information we've received, maybe take photos, visit the site, etc., do some site investigation, write up a report, which will come back to me. That then goes on the website, and there will often be follow-up visits or follow-up interviews depending on the calibre of the sighting. For example, we've had a phenomenal sighting by a neuroscientist in New Zealand, and also 3 hunters who were out and saw an actual craft and got to within 15 metres of it. So there's a terrific amount of information, interviewing and documenting that needs to be done with sightings like that.
And what's your primary objective? Is it to just get the information out there, or what compels you to do it?
Well, we link up with other researchers around the world, so we often find that what we're experiencing here in New Zealand may also be appearing in the skies in our closest neighbour, Australia, or other countries within our vicinity. So we keep a documentation of that kind of link-up and corroborative evidence of sightings, but also sharing, as I said, information about the sightings that occur around seismic and volcanic activity. But our major concern is actually getting the information out to the public, giving it a sense of credibility, especially through some of our pilot sightings and military sightings, and making the information available to people so they can examine it themselves and make up their own minds about what is happening and the reality of the situation.
And what are some of the most compelling or fascinating things that you've found in doing this research?
Well, I think the most compelling thing that I've found is the amount of corroborative evidence that crops up. Sometimes we'll get a sighting and we'll keep it off the website. We won't document it on there at all. We'll keep it quiet because it may have very specific details or specific kinds of descriptions, and we'll wait a few weeks and see what turns up. And invariably, you'll get more sightings come in from around New Zealand, maybe 2 or 3, that give the same details. So you know that this is a reality. It's not something that someone has imagined or some hoax. It is actually there in the sky, and people are seeing it. And I think that's one of the most phenomenal things is the corroborative aspect. And this also carries over into the contact field, where people come up with very minor details that are important because they're a particular description that can only be shared by people who've actually seen it.
And have you found that these sightings are increasing over time, or is it pretty much stable?
No, they're increasing, and despite what the skeptics may say, particularly New Zealand saying that they are not increasing, they are increasing. In fact, we get so many sightings now that we don't put them all on the website. We categorise them in terms of how much detail a person has provided, and so only ones with more detail will go on the site. The others are filed in our archive, but not necessarily put on the website, or it would be a huge website. But yes, I travel overseas and speak. I've just come back from speaking in the UK and Europe, and certainly it seems to be that sightings are increasing. More and more people are seeing things that they can't explain. And also, I think we also have to factor in the fact that more people are becoming interested in the subject, so therefore more people are watching the sky.
Well, let's back up, and I know you've had a lot of very interesting experiences of your own with extraterrestrial contact, and I imagine maybe even extra-dimensional contact. So could you share your story, your childhood story, let's start with, and what that was like, and just a little bit higher level, and we'll get into more detail as we go forward.
Okay, well, as a child, I had the experience very often of waking at night and seeing three glowing figures by my bed. Now, in those days, in 1950s New Zealand, everyone went to church. It was a thing that you did on Sunday. Small towns, everyone went to church. And so my perspective that I gained from people around me, particularly my mother, was that it would be guardian angels looking in on me, or perhaps the spirit of family members who've passed over who are coming to have a look at me and visit me. And I accepted that and went along with that, but at the same time, I knew that there were things that didn't quite fit with that description. For example, these figures that appeared by my bed seemed to speak to me, but I never saw facial features or clothing or anything like that. It was just like a glowing silhouette. As to whether that was to protect me from what they really looked like, I don't know, but that's how I recall them. But I know that a great deal of communication went on with the mind, because I could talk to them, but I didn't move my mouth. I shared a bedroom with a sibling, and I never made any noise or spoke out loud. So these communications took place, and I would be told they were taking me somewhere, and that's the last I remember. The next thing I remember is I'm back in bed, they're there, and they're thanking me very much, telling me to turn over and go to sleep, which I would do virtually immediately. And in later years, I realised that's because they were making me drop off to sleep. And I would remember this in the morning, wonder about it, and perhaps talk about it to my mother, but not really anyone else.
And
I also had dreams where I recalled being in a white room with these three figures that I couldn't quite see the details of. The white room was very stark. It had, shall we say, furniture in it, or objects in it that I wasn't familiar with. And my memory is of doing things that involved using the mind and the power of the mind. So looking back as an adult, I think that as a child, I was being given some kind of training in telepathy and the use of the mind in different ways. It wasn't until I was in my 20s and I began actually having more full-on contact and actually seeing entities that I made a link to what I'd experienced as a child and realised that that contact had been happening all my life.
now these were, I think you describe in your book, they were short grays that were picking you up, correct?
Yes, that's right. But in later years, my memory of being on a craft, and I saw a variety of other species there, as well as seeing greys actually transform to what some people might call a light being, or similar to what I saw as a child. So yes, mainly with the greys, short and tall, and mixtures of those species.
I think in your book you describe, and even you were talking about the grays appearing as a bright light when they picked you up in your bedroom. Do you think that, have you ever thought about or asked them about why is it that you see the bright light? Is it some sort of, are you entering a different dimension, or are they projecting from a different dimension possibly, and that's why it appears that way? Do you have any theories on that?
You're talking about the bright ball of light?
I'm
Yes.
talking about, you described how the three grays picked you up in your bedroom, and you also, I believe in other parts of your book, describe how when a ship actually picked you up, if I remember correctly, and it appeared as a bright light, right? Why is it always a bright light?
Well, I'm assuming that's something to do with their propulsion system and the electromagnetic field around their craft, which they seem to be able to just drop so that you then visually see the craft and not the field. As to whether that's to protect the person they're taking on board, I don't know. But certainly I've seen quite large balls of light that communicate with me that I know are greys in another form. So they can transform to what we might call the spirit dimension light. We often see light balls of light that we know are spirits, like an orb, and they have appeared to me in that form. And I've actually experienced my body transforming, disintegrating, if I can put it that way, into one of those balls of light to travel with them.
What are some of the other, I think you described tall grays and mantis. What other kind of beings have you encountered on these ships?
The tall greys, what I call the ancient bloodstock of the greys, that are very, very lined. So their whole face is basically formed of folds of skin and down their neck. And then, of course, the mantis and mixtures of these species. So you get greys that have another kind of a look about them. So as to whether it's mixtures of greys or mixtures of greys and something else.
And so you were able to physically interact with these beings. So it wasn't some kind of a holographic projection or something. You were able to physically touch these beings. Is that
Yes,
correct?
it was physical beings, and I've been taken into from childhood into a variety of rooms on the craft for a variety of reasons, and seen many different species. And on one occasion, a small child was accompanying me on a craft, and it was a female, and she put her hand on my hand, and I could feel like a velvety pile on her skin, if I can describe it that way, a little bit clammy. So yes, these were actual physical beings and not holographic projections at all.
Now, I know a lot of people who have experienced similar phenomenon to you. There's a lot of mixed reviews or opinions on the grays, especially the short grays, as being. And I know you have a different opinion, so I'd like to hear more about your opinion on that. Because a lot of people think that they are more of a negative presence, and that they're taking people against their will, and also that they're clones without much of the capacity to think on their own. What's your opinion and experience of them?
Okay, well, let's take the first part, which is the aspect that some people find the greys negative. The species that I've had contact with have certainly not been like that. They're extremely positive and loving and highly intelligent. That doesn't mean to say that other people haven't had contact with other species or other races of greys that have a different agenda or a different reason for being here and manner in which they treat humans. And I've interviewed very many people over the years who've had negative and frightening experiences. However, some of those people have had hypnotic regression and have found that the subconscious mind has told quite a different story, that it hasn't been quite as frightening as they thought it was, and that perhaps positive things have taken place during that time span that they were taken on board a craft. But not all people find that. Certainly my experiences have been positive, and I have found always that the greys not only are highly intelligent, they have individual personalities, although they share what we call the hive mind, where they're actually able to tap into each other and feel and experience what each other are feeling and experiencing and thinking, but they have their own individual persona as well. And on many occasions I have experienced the greys exhibiting sense of humour, either making a joke about my clothing, for example. Usually I have been taken on board at night, so I've been in nightwear, but on one occasion I was taken on board in the late evening when I was returning on a country road from a concert. And of course I was dressed very differently. It was winter and I was in a long winter coat and knee-high boots. And so there was a bit of a joke took place about that. So we have this high intelligence mixed with a humour. So yes, my experiences have been positive. The agenda that I outline in my book, The Dual Soul Connection, is a positive agenda, and it makes complete sense to me based on what I have experienced and what I can see happening in the world around me at the moment.
So in your opinion, there are probably different groups of greys or any number of different kinds of extraterrestrial beings who are interacting with humans. Some may have positive intentions, some not. Is that what you're concluding so far?
I would conclude that, yes, because I mean, we have military whistleblowers who talk about positive experiences, some talk about negative experiences. So, in the same way that we have different ethnic groups in the world who may behave differently and have different values concerning the value of human life, etc., it's entirely probable that that exists in other species in our universe as well.
So are you saying that that there are probably different factions or groups of grays and probably all the different other kinds of extraterrestrial beings, and some may have a positive intentions and others may have negative intentions? Is that what you're finding from your own experience and also from your role as a researcher?
Yes, I think my own personal experiences have been positive, but of course, I've worked with and interviewed many people who've had negative experiences. As to whether that is because they have not recalled the experiences correctly, or when they may have regression, hypnotic regression, they find that it may have been a positive experience and not such a negative one. But I do think there are likely to be a variety of species visiting our planet, and they may all have different agendas. Some may be working together on a single agenda, and others may be independent. Certainly, we hear military whistleblowers talk about positive and negative contacts in the same way that we have abductees and experiencers describing the same. One thing that I would mention, though, is that when you're on a craft and you're confronted with, say, a grey, for example, they don't communicate in the same way that we do. It just cannot be compared the way they communicate. They use the mind and telepathy. So therefore, as part of the way that we communicate, we use our body language, our facial expression, we use the intonation of our voice, etc., to convey our message, whereas they are just using the power of the mind. So therefore, when you receive a telepathic communication from them, it can be a whole cluster of things. So you may receive not just kind of a message, but also you may see colours, images, emotions, smells, etc. So you get this composite. And I can imagine that for a lot of people, this could be quite terrifying, and they may cut themselves off from it because they're fearful. Therefore, they only see a very blank face with dark eyes that can be quite frightening. And I do think that fear is a big stumbling block to people actually making that good, strong link and getting a proper connection and communication.
I know you've described them as being very loving and having a sense of humor and so on. So what's that like from a human standpoint? When you say loving, people may have a certain perception, but you're talking about a telepathic connection, not really so much gestures or words. What do you experience when you experience them as being loving?
That's right. Well, I'll give you an example of when I was a child and I was 8 years old, and a group of greys were asking me to do a particular task, and this was to meet the souls of humans that I would work with later in my life. Some had already incarnated and were already living and had left their body at night in the form of this ball of light and had come on board the craft with souls that had not yet incarnated. And so I was confronted as a child with a room full of balls of light that were communicating with me. And the greys left the room to leave me to make that link and communication with these souls. And they all came towards me one at a time, showing me an image, a futuristic image, if I can put it that way, of what they would look like when I met them. And this was going into the subconscious mind so that that recognition would occur later in life. And when the greys came back into the room, they were very pleased that this had gone well. They had observed it from another room, and they conveyed a sense of love to me by projecting this glow from their body, like a reddish pink glow, but also they made a crystalline singing noise, and it's one of the few times that I've actually heard greys verbalize a sound. And I can only describe it as a crystalline tinkling sound that was very pleasant to listen to. And at the same time, my whole body and mind and being was engulfed in this feeling of love. So for a child, it was like being wrapped in somebody's arms and held closely. That was the kind of feeling that it was.
So this was an audible noise, a sound, or it was something that you felt internally?
No, it was actually an audible sound, and it was actually the feeling of love from them that I felt internally, as well as visually seeing this glow emanate from their body.
Now they don't speak, so where does the sound come from? From their mouths or somewhere
It
else?
comes from presumably the vocal cords or the mouth. I don't know what their physiology in that part of the body is like, but it was an audible sound that projected through an opened mouth.
And what you've mentioned numerous times, their agendas and objectives here. Can you kind of sum up what is their objective, at least with regard to you?
Okay, well, it's quite a complex agenda actually that I take a whole book to outline, but I'll try to be quite succinct. Their agenda begins by working with what I call our spiritual hierarchy that works with our planet. So spiritual masters, if you like to put it that way, who are associated with the care of the souls incarnating on our planet. And quite clearly, we have gone into what I call a retrograde kind of situation spiritually on this planet. We're fast developing high-tech technology, very futuristic technology, and it's not something that we always use with the best integrity on this planet. And often the technology becomes a source of money and power rather than actually something that is used for the benefit of mankind. Or if it does emerge as benefiting mankind, it's so expensive that very few can afford it. I think of hospitals, etc., that can't afford the right machinery to help their patients. So their agenda is to upgrade humanity spiritually and intellectually in every way, but also to bring us to the point where we become aware that we actually are not alone in the universe and that the universe is actually teeming with life and intelligent life too. So this whole process happens by a selection process that takes place. And a lot of experiencers and abductees talk about the familial aspect of their contact, where they've got a mother or father, a grandparent or a great-grandparent who has talked about things that have occurred in their life that all point to the fact that they've somehow or other had contact with extraterrestrials. And the last two generations of those four seem to be the two generations, so my generation and my children's generation, that they have worked with the most. And that has involved contacting that soul spark source before it incarnates, offering it a life, and a life that has certain tasks attached with it that are a part of this developing agenda and the evolution of humanity, raising our consciousness, raising our awareness so that we can join the cosmic community out there. There's a lot of things that we have to overcome, not only with the state of our planet and our environment, but also our attitudes, our warlike attitudes, our regional, our protective attitudes, where we need to take care of each other rather than killing each other off. So this is all part of the agenda of upgrading us, bringing us to this awareness, and it's something that I believe will take and is taking a long time. People talk about disclosure and say, we need disclosure now, we're ready for disclosure. Well, I actually dispute that as an experiencer. I say that it has to be a slow and gradual process, because in the UFO community we can become quite insular or even arrogant about the fact that we might understand some things that other people may not, but we also need to realize we're a tiny percentage of the world population, and there's a great many more millions of people out there who don't even think about space or aliens or anything else in their daily life or even spirituality. And so this is a gentle, slow process that must take place over time in order for it to take place in the right way.
When you refer to a spiritual council of spiritual masters that are guiding this process, what do you know what the makeup is of that? Because I've spoken with a number of other people who are experts in different fields, and some have talked about the spiritual council in different contexts being made up of a variety of different extraterrestrial races. But when you use the word spiritual master, that sort of brings to mind spiritual masters who quite often are human and on Earth, and who have a very enlightening message for people as well. So what is the makeup of this council, do you know?
Well, when we're incarnated in a body on this planet, we're a human. But when we leave that body, we're simply a soul or a source spark. What I call we're a little piece of the field of greater field of consciousness. We are a spark of consciousness. So each of us goes through a process over many lifetimes of leaving the field of consciousness, taking that spark consciousness, and it learns things, it becomes a soul, it incarnates in a body. And I describe this whole process in one of the chapters in my book called Soul Origin, Pathway to a New Life. So when I talk about spiritual masters, I'm not talking about humans or people with long beards and long hair and robes. I'm just talking about that spiritual spark, that soul source that we all stem from in the field of consciousness. And many of those soul sparks or soul sources have spent many lives attaining wisdom and knowledge and understanding and compassion and all of those values that we aspire to as a civilization. And so this is what I'm talking about when I talk about this council. They are souls that can manifest in whatever form they like. Some of them I have seen as extraterrestrials. Some I have seen in the form of what we might call the sage-like image. Some have been balls of light. And I describe prior to entering this life, when I myself was just a ball of light drawn out of the field of consciousness, I describe going before one of this council with another soul, and having some kind of, well, you could call it like a job interview, really, Ethan, where they were discussing whether or not they felt that I had the what I needed to do this life and to complete certain tasks in this life. And so they appeared to me as sage-like forms, extraterrestrials, and balls of light. So just as when we leave our body, if we choose to manifest in some way, we can, so can they.
You mentioned just a few moments ago about the several generations, and I know that you spoke about that, and then later on, I believe it was later on, Dolores Cannon wrote about the several different generations of beings who have come in human form to Earth to help in the evolution of consciousness. Can you share a little about what those different generations were like, what made them unique, and roughly what age group would they be in at this point?
So you're actually talking about the three waves, or are you
Yes.
talking about the generational, the three waves? Okay.
Three waves, yes.
Yes. In 1990, the Greys told, well, and when I was a child, but on one particular incident in 1990, I was given a great deal of information on board a craft about these three waves, which I first talked about publicly in 2007 in Sydney. And Dolores later published a book about it in 2010. So the three waves are these souls that I was just describing previously, who have been selected out for whatever reason to and offered a life on the planet to complete certain tasks in this raising of consciousness on the planet. And each of those three waves has incarnated in a different time period, but they've all overlapped so that there's this ongoing process happening. So the first wave actually is in two parts from my understanding, and I describe it in a great deal more detail than Dolores did. And that is that the first part of the first wave were people who incarnated as far back as like the late 1800s. And they were very much innovators who brought new ideas in spirituality and spiritualism and art and all of the music, all of the things that can raise our awareness and affect our consciousness and affect our soul and affect our world view. But later on, that we had what we might call the star, some people call the star kids, the indigo children, the crystal children, who came in as part of that first wave also, and they have quite clear recollection of living other lives as extraterrestrials. And they brought with them some of those amazing skills that we associate with alien species in terms of telepathy and kinesthetic abilities, etc. And they really are taking the role of showing us what we are capable of doing. The second wave is what I consider I am in, and the second wave is by far the largest. And that includes many of the people who had abduction experiences, contactees experiences, etc. And I think we have had probably the hardest task, because we all have specific individual tasks to do that raises consciousness wherever we may live, or by making films, documentaries, writing books, public speaking. We are really the communicators. And many of those people in that group are in my age group and older, from say their mid-40s right through to their 80s. And they are very much bringing this whole subject to the attention of the public in a whole variety of ways. Many in that group have not yet woken up to the fact, and have not yet woken up to their own experiences, or have not yet examined them sufficiently to understand that they have actually had these kinds of experiences. And as time progresses, I'm predicting in the next 10, 15 years, you'll see a lot more of those people coming forward and talking about their memories and what has happened to them in their life, and how they view things. The third wave, which is like my children's age group, they started incarnating, from my understanding, in around the late 70s, early 80s, and they are still incarnating. Now, these people tend not to have much memory of their experiences. Excuse me. They may have had some experiences, such as my son has had, of remembering the beginning and the end of an experience or contact, but nothing in between. And many of these young people are going to be the movers and changers and shifters of the future. So they are going to get themselves eventually, they'll be well educated, they will get themselves into a position of power and influence. But I use that word power and influence in a positive sense, not a negative sense. They tend to be young people who have a good grounding in what I might call spiritual outlooks, and outlooks about the environment and what we need to do and how to go about it. And they will get into positions right across the board in education, in medicine, and in technology, etc. And they will have the ability then to make huge changes that need to be made in our now quite outdated systems. And those changes will be positive, and they will be driven to help humanity in many positive ways right across the board, including the environment. And I think that a lot of those young people will actually lead us into the future and be involved in future contact.
I've come across a lot of people, all different age groups actually, who have some sense that they're not of this place, that they have some sort of extraterrestrial origin, but a great deal of them really suffer with being here. A lot of them don't want to be here. They are very sensitive to the environment, don't like the negativity of the people that they're around a lot. Do you encounter that a lot, and what advice do you give people like that?
I do, and in many ways I'm probably one of those people myself. My advice is that a part of our task is to learn to like what we have to do. I think a lot of people's dislike of their life stems from the fact that they feel powerless to do anything about it, and therefore it can become burdensome and a place that isn't a good space to be in. I think we have to be as positive as we can and look for every small way that we can make a difference to this world, even if it's just recycling in our home, planting trees, all of those things that are looked upon as being quite greeny, if I can put it that way. But that it is a reality. working in the community, volunteering, changing people's perspectives, trying to be more open about your beliefs or your experiences, and bringing people to a state of familiarity with these things. I think everybody has a slightly different task to do, although they may be lumped into certain groups. For example, communicators talking about their experiences, etc. But I think we have to really work hard. I don't think my life has been easy. Some of the things I've chosen to do have not been easy. They've been difficult. And this is the way when you are making changes in your life and in the world. It's not easy, and you have to really stick with it. And if possible, make contact with like-minded people and form a network of supportive people that you can talk to and that you can get assistance from.
Now, I'm understanding from what you're saying that not all life on Earth is extraterrestrial in origin, or are souls that have had extraterrestrial experiences, but there's a small percentage. Is that right?
Well, I think there's probably more than a small percentage, and I describe in my book the dual soul group, which is quite a complex situation where people souls have chosen to incarnate after having gone through a process with the extraterrestrials of what they call soul enhancement, where they help the soul to be able to tap into that extraterrestrial intelligence or communication mode of thinking, analytical abilities. But I think we have to remember that we all are a universal soul. We're a human, we're a soul in a human body. And I describe in my book being offered two choices of lives, this one and another one where I would become a sponge-like, intelligent sponge-like organism on another planet that would use its intelligence in some way. I never got into finding out how, but that was the choice that was offered to me. So I think that in the future we're going to have to reassess what constitutes an intelligent, sentient being. We are beginning already on this planet, thank goodness, to understand that our fellow animals and creatures on this world have amazing personality, amazing intelligence and potential. And the ETs view them as fellow species. They don't view them as pets or wild animals. Of course, we have to understand that animals live in the wild and behave on this planet in a certain way that can sometimes be dangerous to humans. But we have to learn to value the existence of that species and its purpose for being here. And that is something that is a huge step that humans have to overcome in the future. If we're going to move out into space and take ourselves to other planets and have open communication, we have to understand all the species on our planet first, including ourselves, and we don't at present.
I'm finding more and more people are coming into realizing that they have unusual gifts and abilities, whether it's intuitive or healing or something. Would it be reasonable to assume that they all have some sort of extraterrestrial genetic background, or is it that the whole of human consciousness is evolving even if they don't have that kind of background, and everybody is moving in that direction?
I think that everybody is moving in that direction. From my experiences on craft, being taught to do things with the mind and create holograms and be able to move things with the mind, I think that we all have that potential, and they have told us this time and time again. They have said sometimes, you will do this in the future, you will do this in the future, humans will do this in the future. So as you said, it's a matter of evolving. And it's something that can't be foisted onto the public suddenly. As I said before, where disclosure is concerned, disclosure is not just about telling people that these things and species exist. It is about leading people gently by the hand towards the fact that we are capable of so much more. And that opens up a lot of issues culturally, socially, in religious terms. So there's a great deal to overcome and a great deal of movement that has to happen first. But I do think that more people are exhibiting what we might call psychic, kinesthetic, psi abilities, and I think this is a natural part of our evolution.
Now, do relationships play any role in your interaction with various extraterrestrials? Did you ever encounter relationships among them, men and women, or female and male, and even children? And how does childbirth happen for them?
Childbirth is all about genetic engineering. I have been into rooms where there are large clear canisters, like glass-like canisters with different fetuses in them and different mixtures of species that they have actually created. In terms of the species on board the craft, they all look pretty much the same. They have this very androgynous look about them, but you are able to sense through the telepathic and through the energetic way things feel. You can feel that it's a female or feel that it's a male. Often when you're holding a baby, you can't see if it's wrapped in a material. You can't see what species it is. There's very little in terms of genitalia or breasts that are visible, so very androgynous looking. And also they told me that in the future we will become more like that, but I think we're looking very far into the future. But there's always these predictive things being said by these species about our species and how it will evolve in the future.
So there's no actual relationship interaction between the male and female of the various races.
Well, what I've seen is children being brought up in large groups where they interact with a wide variety of the species, a wide variety of the community on board a craft. Everyone seems to take a part, the entities seem to take a part in raising the children, the ET children, and in educating them. So we don't have the same, from my understanding, the same sort of family ties that we do on a craft, although there are people like Charles Hall who talks about meeting a family of tall whites. I actually haven't experienced that, but I have met ETs on the craft who said to me that they are actually related to me. So my assumption is that there has been some genetic alteration taken place before my birth, and that there is genetic material taken from humans that is perhaps used to create species on the craft.
So I'm trying to understand whether there is any kind of romantic interaction that takes place that you would equate to what it's like in human relationships. Is that even present at all?
I have not witnessed any kind of romantic attachments, but I have witnessed a pure love being expressed between each other under certain circumstances and certain situations, but it's been related to the events that are taking place with humans or other ETs, but not the romantic kind of situations that we might experience on Earth.
You describe, I think, in your book about how on one occasion you were on the ship and they traveled through the Earth to get you home.
That's right.
Now, so did they physically travel through the Earth, or did they simply shift dimensions and travel through the Earth and emerge on the other side in physical form? Do you have any perception of that?
Yes, this is one, as you know, Dr. Rudy Schild, who's an emeritus astrophysicist at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in the US, contributed to my book. And when I first contacted Rudy and asked him to have a look at some of my chapters and tell me what he thought, because I'm no scientist, but there was a lot in my book associated with space and consciousness, which is Rudy's field of expertise, of course. So I sought Rudy out, finally contacted him after trying to contact him for a number of years, and asked him if he would be willing to look at my material. So he asked for 2 or 3 chapters, which I sent. And we went through this process where he asked for more, and he said, I can understand a lot of this in terms of physics, astrophysics, and consciousness. The chapter that you've mentioned is one of 3 chapters that I was quite reluctant to send to Rudy, because even to me, my memories of this experience, and I had very extensive memory of that particular experience, seemed too way out. I thought, how could that possibly happen, that I'd travelled through the Earth in a spaceship? I couldn't understand it. And it was one of the last chapters that I sent to Rudy, and I was half expecting him to come back and say, no, look, this is ridiculous. But he didn't. And those 3 chapters that I was worried about showing to him were actually the 3 that he commented on the most and had the most understanding of. So that was really great validation for me. And I described the process of going through the planet. The extraterrestrial, who was quite human-like, who was giving me instruction on this small craft, described how we would leave the reality we were in. This is a simplistic way he put it to me as a non-scientist. We would leave the reality we were in, and it was like we would go into this other dimensional state. We would run alongside, and then we would come back in again. And during that process of running alongside our normal reality, we would pass physically through the planet. When Rudy examined this, he said, well, this really is the same principle and process that many experiencers describe in abductees, of being taken through a glass door, being taken through a window or a door. It is a process whereby the whole molecular structure is altered in that time span. In that short time span, it takes on a different form, which the ET described as leaving this reality and running alongside, obviously in a different form, and then coming back in again when we emerged on the other side. So that was the best way that Rudy described it to me, and I can see that's highly feasible. We didn't incinerate in the middle of the earth, so some process took place that got us there, because 1 minute we are in daylight and the next we're in darkness, and we are travelling along the New Zealand coastline towards where I live. So that took a very short space of time.
And the reason I asked this next question is because I've interviewed a number of scientists over the months past, and they all have different compelling theories on whether the Earth is round and hollow and whether it's flat. And what did it appear to you like? Just what we all assume it is based on satellite photos we've seen, or did it look different to you?
Well, at the beginning of the process of going through the planet, the craft went out, and I don't know whether it went just beyond the atmosphere or to the edge of our atmosphere, where you could see the curvature of the planet and all of I could see the continents and the sea and all of that. It was really beautiful and breathtakingly striking. And then we approached the planet at speed. At that point, what I call the window screen, where I was able to see what was happening outside and see the planet, began to spiral. So the image began to spiral, which Rudy has commented about in his footnotes in a book, and then it went black. So during the process of actually passing through the space that the planet occupies, if I can put it that way, the screen was black, and there was only sound and like coloured static on the screen, and I couldn't see anything else until we seemed to pop out of the air on the other side. In the southern hemisphere, it's dark, and I could see lights along a coastline. But it's interesting that your comment on the hollow Earth, because I recently worked with a young woman who has I did a regression with her, and she has experienced going inside the planet and described this hollow place that was very beautiful with very striking colours, and that there were entities in there who communicated with her and took her around and did certain things. So there are certainly people who talk about this hollow Earth and having been taken to some other place. Whether the Earth is actually hollow or whether some other dimension exists within the space that the Earth occupies is another thought.
They also took you back in time to the Earth a long time ago, right? Am I remembering that correctly?
Uh,
Did,
no.
did they, I thought they allowed you to view the planet from a distant past.
They allowed me to view the planet in the future
Oh, in
of
the future.
what its coming Earth changes, and that was a quite a horrifying experience, and and we actually did a regression on that experience to see what other information would come out that I didn't have conscious recall of. And I know that I was sitting in an auditorium with a lot of people, and there were greys and humans down the front in what I call a chain of command. And we were shown visions of the future, terrible destruction and terrible earth changes on the planet. Now, I think we've been going through that for quite a few years, but from my understanding, there's going to be quite a few more incidents like that humanity is going to have to face and go through. And these were shown to us in what I call quick time. So there were at the beginning there were one image showing on the screen every few seconds, and then it became so many images per second that it was just like a blur on the screen, and yet we had been taught to assimilate all of that. Most of the auditorium was sobbing in tears, but with our eyes still focused on the screen. And one of the entities present when the images were completed threw out what I call a blanket of calm over us with his mind, so that our emotions calmed and we were able to think about this situation quite clearly and clinically without all the terrible, tearful emotion attached to it, and to realize that so much has to be done in our world that I think we can prevent some things happening, but that involves a giant shift in our consciousness.
Are those Earth changes of our own causing, or are they just natural changes that are inevitable that will happen?
Well, that's a very difficult one, Ethan, because I sort of have a foot in both camps there. I tend to think that in the same way that we are evolving, our planet is evolving. Our planet is likely to be being affected by other things that are happening in not only our solar system but in our neighborhood in the galaxy. And the Greys have described this to me in detail. How if we do have a nuclear explosion on our planet, it has an effect far beyond our solar system. So I do feel that our planet and the stability of our planet may be being affected by external forces. But at the same time, I also view, as the ETs do, view our planet as a living organism. And we are simply, if I can put it this way, like parasites on the living organism. And I do believe that our consciousness can create a terrible darkness, or it can create a wonderful light. And I think we've been creating quite a lot of terrible darkness. And this also, we don't know what energetic effect this is going to have on our planet. And we know we can energetically affect each other. Plants are affected by our energy field. Animals are affected by our energy field, and vice versa. So it stands to reason that if there's millions and millions of humans on the planet, our energy field and what is contained in that, be it positive or negative, can affect everything around us, and that includes the planet. So I do think that to some extent we can prevent things like this from happening as we raise our consciousness and awareness, and it becomes a more spiritual place to live. I think that's very much the case. It's very much the Gaia theory that Mr. Lovelock talked about many years ago.
You've mentioned the nuclear explosions and how the blast wave goes far beyond our own planet into the solar system and beyond. So what's that? What kind of impact does that have? Did they ever explain that to you? The impact that it has outside of our own planet?
Well, yes, I think it affects our nervous system for a start, planet wide. But I think energetically, in the same way that I was just describing about planet Earth, if you've got some energetic blast that's going out into space, it's going to have an effect on the stability or the electromagnetic field of another planet, and therefore it's going to affect civilization through the nervous system. On 2 occasions, the Greys talked to me about the effect of nuclear explosions. One was when I was taken to what I call a room where I was shown a galaxy screen, and it was like a virtual reality room where they could touch the screen that showed the whole Milky Way galaxy, and up in the air and within the room they could bring up a solar system, they could bring up planets and suns or moons, they could enlarge them, zoom them, they could reduce them, etc. And it was on this occasion that he was actually, this may be the occasion you were talking about, where he was able to take me back in time with the virtual reality show to show me the day and the time that the nuclear explosions occurred with Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And he showed me this, he was able to adjust the virtual reality display so that I was actually in colour able to see the shock wave going out from our planet and far beyond. And he kept reducing the planet in size so that I could see the distance that the shock wave was covering. That was a real wake-up moment for me. And I'm good friends with Robert Salas, who talks about his experience at Malmstrom Air Force Base back in the 60s when a UFO came in and shut down their nuclear warheads. And Robert now, of course, is an anti-nuclear campaigner. So this was a wake-up call for me to see the kind of damage that we could cause for other civilizations. But they have talked to me on another occasion where they talked about the effect of energy fields and the flows around planets, and how when they travel, they use those natural flows in space. They don't go cutting through flows because it can have the same effect for civilizations that a nuclear explosion can have going out into space. And when they come within our atmosphere, they use the same principle, that we have flows of energy, flows of weather patterns on our planet, places where certain energy fields are more prominent, and they use the ley lines, etc., and they use all of that information in the way that they travel through our atmosphere. And they told me that in the future we would understand the damage that a lot of our aircraft are doing by cutting through these energy fields. And it's very interesting, just before I went overseas recently to speak, I found a bit of corroborative evidence about that. I was told that about 20-something years ago. And in the States, NASA is working with a company to develop new technology for high-speed aircraft, supersonic aircraft, so that the supersonic effect on humans and property is not so devastating. So this realization is now filtering into our own consciousness.
Now, when they showed you, you said they made the Earth smaller and smaller, and they showed you how much farther out the blast wave went. How far did it go out that they showed you?
Well, they showed it going right out into our solar system. They didn't take he didn't take the virtual reality any further than that, but he described how it can go out much, much further into space and disturb other species or other planets. Excuse me.
Now, was this the main reason that they got involved? Well, obviously you said this has been going on since the 1800s. So, but
well, I think they've been visiting us for thousands of years, and there seems to be quite a lot of evidence of that showing up in archaeology and ancient paintings and other things. But more so since we showed our potential for being a nuclear race. And I think that's when they really realised that we could be a danger to other civilizations and to ourselves.
Have they ever spoken with you about the origins of the human beings? There are a lot of theories that we were genetically altered along the way. Obviously, conventional belief is that we descended from apes, which seems to not hold a lot of validity the more and more science comes out in that area. Do you have any clarity on that?
Oh, well, they've never talked about our origin, but they have said on a number of occasions, "You are us." So the assumption is that there has been genetic engineering, perhaps over many hundreds of years, and the fact that we have been monitored, I think, as a what you might call a young civilization. These civilizations are very much more advanced than us, and I think that there's a natural tendency for them to want to monitor us if they've had a part in creating us or creating some species on the planet, or bringing some of that plant material or species material here in the first place.
A lot of people who are of this awareness, who are open to the idea of extraterrestrials are, and you mentioned this earlier, that contact is happening in so many different ways already, but a lot of people are waiting for a ship to land on mainstream news, and beings to come out and speak to our leaders and so on. Um, Obviously, the contact is happening in many different dimensional experiences throughout our planet, through people like you and people having their own individual experiences and so on. Um, do you believe that there is, or I'm sorry, not a matter of belief, but have they told you whether or not they have made any attempt to contact, or is there, I guess what I'm getting at is there an intention on the part of our global leaders to suppress this kind of information or to inhibit us from having this understanding?
Well, there seems to be quite a lot of evidence out there, particularly amongst whistleblowers or people who formerly worked for military or government in various countries, that it is the case that we have not been kept informed of what is actually happening. I mean, I describe in a number of chapters in my book where I've been taken to underground bases or onto craft where there are actually humans there who are working with the ETs, and I've been told that approaches and communications have taken place between certain species of ETs and various governments over the years. That some of those agreements have been broken or have not continued, others have. But whenever there's been anything discussed on a craft to do with the future of mankind and the future of the planet, there's nearly always been humans there who communicate telepathically as well as the entities do, and who are dressed in sometimes grey, sometimes navy blue overalls without insignia. So the ETs described to me on one occasion that they have assisted in creating a structure. They said a structure upon which contact can take place. And that structure consists of people, humans, in various positions around the world, what they described as being like the structure of a police force, but not the nature of a police force, where should open communication be deemed to be necessary to take place in the future, or as people become much more aware of the ET presence, these people can swing into action and take certain steps or take control of things or assist in some way. I never ever felt that that was a negative thing. Some people have suggested to me, oh, but this might be about power and control. But I certainly never felt that. In any of the lecture kind of situations I attended on craft or in these underground facilities, I never felt that feeling of being threatened or being coerced or it being a negative agenda in any way. That is not to say that that kind of agenda and liaison doesn't exist. It may well do, and there are people who do say that there is the negative kind of agenda happening as well.
There are some people and a lot of theories out there that there is a lower consciousness extraterrestrial race. That are several, but in particular, a lot of them are referred to as the reptilian race, who have been working with a more of a negative intention toward the consciousness of the planet. Have you been made aware of any of that through your contact with extraterrestrial beings?
I have never seen a reptilian, and I've never had any reference made to them by the ETs I've had contact with. I have interviewed and worked with people who have had experiences, and sometimes negative ones, sometimes positive, with reptilians, but I have no personal experience of the reptilians myself. The only reference that I've heard the Greys make is on one occasion a Grey that I've had quite a lot of contact with has said to me that there are other species visiting the planet whose agenda is not the same as theirs, and that's the only reference. And he did not mention whether it was a reptilian race or some other.
You speak, and you've mentioned earlier today in our conversation about how you have developed some extrasensory or unusual abilities, unusual meaning not the typical human kind of abilities, and that as a human species, we're sort of heading toward that, where more and more people will have those kind of abilities. Now, do you think that those abilities developed in you as a result of your contact with these extraterrestrial beings and maybe being exposed to a higher dimension, higher dimensional energies in that environment, or was this something that you were always that you had inherent within you, and that's something that most human beings will also be heading toward in the near future?
Well, I'll address it by starting with the familial aspect of some of these contacts. My family, my mother's family, my mother is an intuitive artist. My grandmother was a person who attended like spiritual societies, spiritualist church in the early days in New Zealand when that was kind of in vogue. She was what you call psychic, able to see spirit people, communicate with spirit people, very perceptive, that kind of thing. And that has come right through my mother's side of the family to me and down to my sons as well. As a child myself, I was, from a very early age, was able to see and communicate with the spirit world. I could see auras around people. I had telepathic communication with animals, which started with my own dog that I had when I was 4. And then I realized I was doing it with other animals as well, and birds and other dogs and cats and horses. That developed over the years. So there were all these what you might call psychic abilities that I exhibited as a child. I learned very early on to keep them hidden away because other children and my peers and friends didn't experience that, and so it wasn't a wise thing to talk about that at school. And a lot of people describe that. So I think there's this familial tendency, which means it could be a genetic tendency, which means it could also be a consciousness thing or a spirit soul thing that I've incarnated in a family with souls that I have worked with me. My grandmother, my mother have all been part of shaping me, and maybe that was designed that way. Maybe they were souls who incarnated to do that, to sort of get me to where I am today. I don't know. But when I look back on the abilities that I had started in childhood, when I was older and started having full conscious memories of going on a craft and communicating with ETs, it all made sense because everything that I'd been doing as a child is what was normal on a craft. So through regression, I explored some of my experiences of childhood and found, of course, that this contact had been going on all my life and, in fact, prior to me incarnating in this life. So, yes, I think many of the abilities people talk about have been shaped and taught by the ETs, and I described earlier the dreams that I had of being taught mind things as a child. And the interesting thing, though, is that when you're on a craft, you get on there and your consciousness, your energy field just seems to rise up and expand. And you're able to do things in that environment, particularly with their conscious technology, that you can tap into, you are able to do things that I can't do here. I can't levitate my cup off the bench. I can't form a hologram in the air and make things go through it and around it, but even as a child I was doing that on a craft and on into adulthood. So there is something about the environment on the craft that where everything is keyed into the conscious computer, the consciousness of the craft itself and everything within it. And that enables you to be able to do these things. But the ETs do it without having to tap into anything. That's just part of their makeup. We need that extra impetus on the craft. But as I said, I've been told humans will do all of that in the future.
So if the craft provided you with an environment where this sort of thing was possible, levitation, for example, and and they told you that in the future humans will do this, all these things also, does that imply that maybe the Earth will embody a different level of consciousness, more similar to what was in the ship, to allow these sorts of things to be possible? Because right now, obviously, I can't levitate a cup either. So, is that a factor of the level of vibration of the planet as a whole, that we can't do that as part of the reason, or is it simply that humans haven't evolved far enough?
I think part of it is evolution. Part of it is also the fact that we don't tend to believe we can do these things. If you don't believe you can do it, you won't do it, or you're unlikely to do it. So I think that it's part of our evolution as a species, as humans, to learn to be able to do these things without that added impetus on the craft that humans seem to need. But also I think as we evolve, everything around us has to evolve. If it doesn't keep up, it might just fade away. So I think that in the future, and we're looking quite a long way into the future, I think as I won't be around then, but as humans evolve, so will our planet. I think our planet, our species, everything will be very, very different.
Have they ever described for you what the future of the planet is like, say, in the next 10 years? Is it, if you watch mainstream media, which I don't really, obviously there's a lot of chaos and suffering and wars and a lot of very negative things going on in the world right now. But at the same time, there is obviously a very massive awakening. Even the fact that somebody like you is writing books and lecturing and people are showing up to hear what you have to say is a sign that there is something happening. But do you foresee, first of all, that we are headed in the right direction and toward a more conscious, enlightened future? And what time frame, if you have any idea of that, before we really start to see that on a more mass scale?
Well, from what the ETs have shown me, I think we have to go through a few growing pains and changing pains first, and that will include our severe weather that's happening and more earth changes. And sometimes, for people to really change and evolve, they have to hit rock bottom first. And I wonder if humanity has to actually hit rock bottom before it's actually willing to look at itself. I think we're all probably guilty of turning a blind eye to things or not having time for things or whatever. That's the nature of our life. But we may find we have to change that in the near future, or we will suffer for it. I have been shown a futuristic image in the future where the Earth did look it was quite a brief image where nature looked very different, the planet looked very different, the sky looked very different, and the people looked quite different. So I tend to think we're not going to obliterate ourselves. We're going to go through the changes. They may be painful, but we will come out the other end in the future. And you and I may not live to see that, but we are a part of that change nevertheless. It has to start somewhere, and it's like a snowball rolling and gathering snow, or a rock gathering moss. It has to happen. And I really don't think the ETs are not here to save us. People say, someone wrote to me and said, Well, you've talked in your book about how the ETs are developing technology for us for transforming huge amounts of water into pure water, dirty water to pure water. Well, why aren't they giving it to us? Well, I think we have to change our attitudes, because at the moment we're looking at selling water. Water has become a commodity, not a human right anymore. We're making money out of water. We're misusing water. So why would they come in and provide us with technology that we then use to have power and control and make money out of, and not to help humanity at all? These things are there to help pick us up when we've hit rock bottom. And when we hit rock bottom and show a willingness to change, then maybe the assistance will be there for us. It's from a teacher's perspective, if you hand everything to a child on a plate and there's no actual process in them learning what you're giving them on a plate, learning about it, they might have that thing, but they don't have any understanding that goes with it. So what's the point of coming in and saving us if we then have not changed our attitudes and we turn around and we start doing the same behavior patterns again?
Well, I think many of us, especially the viewers of a show like this show, really feel like we're stuck in a world with a lot of people who are causing a lot of suffering, a world that we don't want to really necessarily live in. So do you have any perception of how close to rock bottom we've actually reached? Because I know a lot of people really feel like, and especially this past year, I think I've been getting a lot of messages from people all over the world who are going through immense amounts of struggle in their lives. And do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I can give you what I asked. I asked the same question of the ETs once. When is this going to happen? When are we going to start going up? How long is this process going to take? And they do this little telepathic thing where if they want to explain something to you in terms that you will understand, they reach into your mind. They go in and they look at all your memory banks and they pull out an analogy or something that you will understand. Then they couch the explanation within that so that you can understand. So he delved into my mind momentarily, and then he said, well, it's like a train journey. You have a starting point and a destination point. And how long it takes the train to get there is dependent on who gets on and off at different stops, how long it stops at different stations, what might hold it up, whether there's a rock fall on the line or whether the train breaks down. You know that eventually you're going to get to that destination. We know you're going to get there. But what happens in between in the train journey and how long it takes is dependent on all of you. So that was the best way that he could describe. The other one is I describe it's like an elastic band. You can pull it out one day and it comes back again the next. So it expands and contracts. I'll just take that off. So really, I don't think there is a time span. It's dependent on us and how far we're willing to move along the track of spirituality and the environment and our attitudes towards each other. And if you look at what's happening worldwide, the Greys said to a group of humans that I was amongst on one occasion, you are all going to become like current event watchers. You're going to get to a point where you don't want to watch the news, as you said, Ethan, but you're going to start watching it. You're going to watch all kinds of news that you can access, and you're going to watch what's happening around the planet. And when you see certain things happening that we've told you about, you're going to know that some bad times are getting near. Now, way back in the 80s, a group of Greys told us there will come a time when you'll become a borderless world, and there will be thousands and thousands of people who will not know where to go geographically, where to go physically, where they will be safe, and where their next meal will come from. Now, when I started seeing the news features of the hundreds of thousands of immigrants moving up from Northern Africa, across the Mediterranean, and through Europe, and I've just come back from Europe and seen some of it for myself, that was a wake-up call. Okay, what they told me all those years ago is happening now. So I think we're getting quite close to some quite tremendous changes on the planet. They may be painful and negative, some of them may be positive. We can hope that some of them will be positive, but we are near a time of action, needing to act, and we are needing to prepare for that time in whatever way is best for each of us individually and our families.
So you don't have any specific advice as far as when you say it's near a time to act and it's time for action, what kind of action would a person take at this point if they are more conscious and more aware of things like you're discussing right now?
Well, I think we have to be very practical about this, because we can have spiritual understandings that we can have understandings about what is happening around us and not be able to help other people to have that same understanding, and they may not want that understanding, they may not be ready for that understanding. But what we have to do is practical things within our community, within our home, and what I said before is simply looking after the environment. Is bring it down to the most simplest terms, Ethan, is be a good person and lead a good life. That will immediately have an effect on everyone around you. And we all meet a lot of people every day, our family, our friends, our workmates. You, for example, interviewing people with your interview process, you're reaching a lot of people. But if we are leading a good life and being the best we can in our day-to-day life and taking care of those around us and being aspiring to all of the good principles of life that humans want to aspire to, then we are going to affect the energy of our energy field and everyone else's, and we are going to assist the process of evolution.
I know a lot of experiencers come from a family of experiencers. So now you mentioned that your mother had intuitive ability and so on. But do you know that any of your other family members actually had extraterrestrial contact of any kind?
Yes, I do, and but I'm not going to name who those people are because I don't have permission. But yes, there are 3 other people in my family who have had that kind of contact along with myself.
Could you share the story? In your book, you talk about the glowing ball that later became your son. Can you share that story and what that was like?
Yes. When I was 8 years old, I was taken onto a craft and into what I call a playroom, where there were a lot of other human children and ET children of different species who just interacted, did mind game things, got to know each other on a telepathic level and energetic level. I was approached by what I call a senior grey, who came into the playroom and approached me and said, would I like to meet another child? And I said, oh, yes, okay. So he took me off down a corridor and into a room where we waited, into a small white room where we waited quietly. And then eventually through the door came 2 greys with a big soccer ball-sized, glowing electric blue ball of light. And I was initially quite disappointed because I was expecting another child, not a ball of light. And for a few minutes, the grey gave me telepathically a rundown on what this ball was. And the first thing he said was, this ball of light will be your son in the future. This is the soul of your future son. Now, as an 8-year-old child, I got quite upset and a little frightened about that. I didn't understand what was happening. So he then did what I call sent out 3 telepathic layers of information. The first one was just some brief information. This ball of light will be your son, the soul of your son. When you grow up and get married and you have children, you'll have a son. This ball of light will be the soul of that child. Then a second sheet of information that was massive. And it referred to what I talked about before, the 3 waves that would incarnate on the planet to upgrade humanity and help with our evolutionary process. And there was a great deal of information about each of those and where I fitted into this and where this child would fit into this. And then the last little bit of information was, okay, we're going to leave you to play together now and see how you get on. It's all fine. We're off now. We'll come back shortly. And so they left the room. They left me with the ball of light. And eventually it began telepathically communicating with me. We played around the room, did some cartwheels and played with it. And then they came back into the room, said, good, this is fine. This association will work fine, which made me realize it was a bit of a test, them leaving us on our own to see whether we would relate. And obviously they were in a process of deciding whether this should be the soul who incarnates as my son. And they thought, yes, this is going to work. So they took me off down the corridor, took the blue ball away and back to the playroom. I asked if I could tell the other kids about it, and he said, no, this is just for you. And immediately it faded from my mind. He just removed it so that I wouldn't go and talk to the other kids. And from that time on board craft, I spent time with this soul. I was educated with it. I got to know it very well. And then later on, when I was pregnant with my first child, I was taken on board craft again, and they did what they called the soul insertion process, where the soul was merged into the baby, the body of my as yet unborn child, and they lowered my entire metabolism to a state where I was cold and numb and couldn't think straight. And once the soul had entered the body, they raised the metabolism back to normal. So that's the story of the blue ball of light, Ethan.
And does your son have any, now he's what, in his late 20s now, or I can't remember.
He's in his early 30s.
Oh, early 30s. So does he have a recollection of that experience with you prior to his birth?
No, he's part of what I described earlier on as the 3rd wave, who will make changes in the world. He has some minimal memory of beginning and ends of contacts, but nothing in between, very minimal memory. But he exhibits all the same kinds of psychic and telepathic abilities that I had as a child, and he always has from his birth. So it'll be interesting to see where his career and his life path takes him.
So is his soul of an extraterrestrial origin then, more so than having had a lot of Earth experiences?
Well, it's what I call a universal soul. It's part of the field of consciousness, a spark from the field of consciousness. But he has had this, I know because I've been present when it's been taking place on a craft, he's had this education on board as a child, also as a soul, as a ball of light in the soul state, where we view our life and everything differently from the human persona. So he's had quite an extensive education, which I can see coming out in his day-to-day life. But at present, he has a job and a career, and he is not at this time following the UFO field in the way that I have in my life. And obviously that is not his path to do that. There is something else that he has to do in life eventually.
Now, help me understand why it is that these extraterrestrials were involved in the choosing of what soul would be born to you in the future. I'm assuming that not all human beings are incarnated in that way through some sort of extraterrestrial interaction. So why in this case did that happen, and why is it that they have this ability to interact with a soul in an energetic form and then choose to bring that soul into your body in the future?
Okay, well, in my chapter in the book, Soul Origin, I talk about a memory I had. People often get flashbacks in life, flashbacks of an earlier memory in their life or whatever. We all experience that kind of thing that comes quite suddenly. I actually had a flashback of before I was born, and it took me some time to work out that that's actually what I was remembering. And in this situation, I was in front of this spiritual council that I talked about earlier on. I was I knew that I was a purple ball of light, and with me was a blue ball of light. And I was able to describe interacting with this council about whether I was going to be able to incarnate and do a particular task in life. And this blue ball, I understood, had worked with me, if I can put it that way, had incarnated in other lives and in other places, not just on Earth, but in other civilizations in previous lives. And so if you can put it this way, we had a match, an energetic match, and the two souls, and we worked together well before. And when I was in front of this council as a ball of light, it was interesting that this blue ball seemed infinitely wiser than me. I was aware that it was actually, shall we say, speaking for me or interacting for me on my behalf, as if it was like my lawyer or my agent, if I can put it that way. And it was only later, of course, that I found out through the experience I've just described that this blue ball would actually become my son. So we have to view souls not just as people we know or family members or whatever, but as actual universal souls who come into a body to lead a life for a specific purpose or to complete certain tasks or learn certain lessons.
And have they ever talked to you about, obviously, I'm assuming that they've discussed it with you, but basically that all lifetimes and all time really only exists in our material universe, right? So all time is actually happening at the same time. So is there, from their perception, multiple outcomes for the future of our planet and our human civilization, different timelines, for example, or do you have any thoughts on that or any concept of that?
Well, that's interesting you raise that, because I have been shown two different things. I was shown the image of what Earth might look like in the future, but I was also shown an image of somewhere that was like a copy of Earth or a reproduction of Earth that was actually different. So it may be that there is an alternative possibility for our future. I don't know. I haven't been told any definite information on that. I've just been shown those two things, that there's this other possibility sort of hanging in the background in the balance. As to whether it's another dimension or another existence, I don't know.
I've been speaking with some number of scientists and physicists in recent months, and also intuitives and intuitive channels and a variety of different people, and there seems to be this common belief that the Earth is going to split into two dimensions, and one will be a more positive, highly conscious experience, and the other will be more like it is now. So is that kind of what you're describing, do you think?
That's entirely possible, because if I can go back to the experience of passing through the Earth, I was in a different existence, but I was still in a craft traveling through our planet, if I can put it that way. But I was not part of what was happening in a sense, at that moment in time on the planet. I was still there, but I was in some other reality or dimension. So that is entirely a possibility. I think there's all kinds of theories coming out at the moment, which I think is marvelous, because we're examining all potentials and we're realizing that these potentials exist and that we have huge potential that exists. So yes, having experienced kind of being in two places at once myself, I think that that's a possibility that we could look at.
So would you say from that vantage point that there already are multiple dimensional experiences happening on Earth? For example, you and I are having this conversation about extraterrestrials and these kind of things, where there are a lot of people in the world who don't believe in these things and are very convinced of a different version of reality. There are people who are fighting wars and doing all kinds of things that people like you and I wouldn't be involved in. So is that what your perception is when you were just explaining the experience in the ship, as far as experiencing different dimensions but being in the same, technically on the same planet?
Well, I think that it's quite obvious that for things to change on our planet, there's millions and millions of people who, as you said, are not even aware that we need to change or that there are changes taking place. So how do we shift that mass of humanity? How do we get them to along the train ride a bit further? I don't know. Is it going to be simply that we have so many earth changes and calamities and wars that we reach a point where we're absolutely desperate, and then we hit rock bottom and we make the decision collectively that we're going to change our ways? I don't know if we can even do that, Ethan, because when we look at the vast range of humanity, we have so many differences culturally, spiritually, religiously, you name it. There are so many differences to be overcome. How do we get ourselves into this sense of oneness? In order for us to get into the sense of oneness, we must either have something so terrible happen to us that we all are crying out for help and change and committing ourselves to change, or those who are committed to the change must separate in some way. And we will not be able to exist alongside people who can't make that leap and make those changes. How that is going to take place, I don't know. We're living it now. We're living it every day, moving closer to these changes. But just how it's actually eventually going to happen, I don't know. When you look at YouTube and the internet, there's any amount of people coming up with theories and ideas, and all of them can be potentials. Some of them may not be. But the thing is, as you said, more and more people are thinking about it. More and more people are realizing the need for this change. So will a separation take place into two dimensions or existences? I don't know. I have seen greys standing in a corridor transitioning between different forms and saying, this is how we appear in another dimension. When we go into this dimension, this is what we look like. Are we going to end up like that? Who knows? We're in this process now, but at present we can't see too far ahead.
So when they transform into other dimensions, what do they become? Just balls of light, or can you describe that?
Yes, I actually spoke about this in Europe just recently, and they changed from their grey physical form to various forms. One looked like, first of all, looked like an old-fashioned film negative, if I can put it that way, where everything reverses from black and white to the opposite. Then they changed into a glowing white form, and then they changed into two species overlapping, so inhabiting the same body at the same space at the same time, so that you could see the two species overlapping and merging. As to whether we're going to become like that and be able to overlap into two different realities and cross over and exist and work in both, I don't know. It's a very exciting thought, though, isn't it?
So the form that they show up for us as grays, is that something that they choose for our benefit because we need to see them in a certain form, or is that their true form in this dimension?
Well, I guess in this dimension it must be their true form. They've shown me, as I said, the rootstock form, the ancient form with the many lines on the face and body. But they have said this is how we appear to you in this reality, but we can appear to you in other forms by simply putting that into your mind. So there's that mind control and mind ability that they have to have us view them differently. And a lot of abductees talk about the screen memories, where they remember an owl or a clown or some other form or creature rather than actually the grey that was actually present with them.
Mm-hmm. So you described earlier briefly that you were shown a future of the Earth that was more positive and humans looked differently and the planet looked differently. Can you give a little more description about what you saw?
Okay, well, I saw a sky that was very different. It seemed to me like I was looking at Earth, but the sky was extremely pale, very, very pale blue, paler than anything I've ever seen. And the the foliage on the trees and the grass and everything seemed to be different in that it glowed. But not only that, it interacted with humans. It interacted with people, and I have memory of being taken to another planet, which I'm exploring at present in view of writing about this. And I saw a similar thing there, where the actual plants, if you can put it that way, strange-looking plants were actually interacting with the entities walking amongst them. So, and the humans that I saw seemed to have a glow around them. They weren't, like as if the aura was present all the time and visible. So, as to whether that is going to eventuate in our distant future, I don't know, but that's something that I observed.
Obviously, I'm assuming that these extraterrestrial beings you've interacted with, they don't actually physically eat anything, right? So is that the case?
No, I've actually seen being taken as a 12-year-old child to what I call a kitchen on the craft. Nothing like any kitchen we might have, but there was a group of greys sitting around a table, and they were actually creating something in a small machine that was seemed to be fibrous. It seemed to be like a mass of fibers that they laid in extremely fine, thin layers, and then the machine cut it into little strips about, you know, 5 or 6 centimeters by a couple of centimeters wide. And I was told that they could absorb that. If they placed it on their skin, they absorbed nutrients from it, and the actual fibers then just disintegrated into almost nothing and fell off. And I was also told that they could ingest it by simply placing it into their mouth. They don't chew as we do or as they used to, in millennia past, but it's simply another way that it can be absorbed. So they don't seem to actually ingest quantities of food as we do, but they absorb nutrients and they absorb energy. And I was told on one occasion how in the future humans will be able to gain like a temporary sustenance in times of need from plants by actually, they said, ingesting but acquiring something from the energy field of the plant that sustains us in a short-term situation, which I found very interesting. And it's they told us, the group of humans I was with, that we would not be allowed to remember it because we weren't ready for understanding that level of energy use, and I have never been able to recall it or unlock actually how it's done.
So I assume that do they have an opinion, or have they ever talked about the human consumption of meats? Because obviously it sounds like eating plants is something that's in our future, or at least absorbing the energy from plants. But what about the consumption of meat? Is that adverse to us, or do you have any thoughts on that?
They've never actually talked about the consumption of meat. Sometimes they go in a roundabout way to address an issue. They have talked about the way that we treat animals. And so I think the consumption of meat falls into that category. They've not only talked about how we view our pets and how we treat our pets, but also how we interact with animals and species on the planet. And they view them as fellow species. We view them as like wild animals or dangerous animals, or we view them as pets, and we have a sense of ownership. They talked about how we have a sense of ownership over animals, and until we can eliminate that sense of ownership, we will never understand the true relationship that could exist between what they called our companion species, and how our companion species actually contribute to our existence on the planet. And we don't yet recognise it. I mean, there are people who do, of course. There's plenty of people who are animal whisperers, work with animals all the time. That's their field of expertise, who will understand this connection that we do and can have with the creatures of this planet.
So the human body is not at this point ready to simply live off of energy. I know there are some people who do, or at least they claim they do, but or is that something that we can do now?
Well, I think it's something that we can do now if we were instructed and time was spent to show us and teach us how. I know that on craft, a lot of the experiences I describe in my book relate to the use of energy and the observation of energy and energy for healing, etc. All of those kinds of things are covered. But in terms of existing on energy, I think that's going to be a long way off yet. I think our whole attitude towards ourselves and each other would have to change before many of us can even accept the existence of energy. Lots of people just don't even accept that it exists in this way.
Now you mentioned a little bit here and there details about the craft. What were all the craft that you were on identical, and what do they actually look like to you?
No, a lot of the craft were very different. They ranged from small, what I call scout craft, that about 5 or 6 entities and humans can fit on. There were craft that looked very small, but once you started to go through the opening, it was as if the whole interior became extremely expansive. And that's an amazing concept, that some things that seem so small can expand out into a vast area. And there's a lot of experiencers who talk about this, and I've discussed this in depth with Dr. Schuld. Then there's been very large craft that are like the size of a city, and there's been unusual shaped craft, like, for example, a rectangular prism, like a shoebox, a very, very large shoebox. And for quite a few years, remembering these kinds of craft, I thought I must be going crazy or remembering them incorrectly. But then over the years, of course, I came across other people overseas who've seen the same as me. And in Denmark, just a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed a lady who'd seen an enormous football field-sized rectangular shoebox-shaped craft over Greenland, and was able to describe it in similar terms that I can describe it. So there's a vast variety of craft out there used for different purposes, and the transportation methods between those craft for humans can be quite different as well. And a lot of the black triangles that we're seeing in our sky, some of them I think are our own secret technology, but many of them are alien craft, and they have humans working on board.
Why is it that we don't see more photographs of craft?
I think that's got a lot to do with whether or not they want to be photographed at present. I interview people who've had UFO sightings all the time, and many of them say, I had my camera right there. In fact, it was right on the table, or it was in the car next to me. And for whatever reason, I didn't take a picture. So as to whether it's because you're in a state of surprise and shock and you don't think to take the picture, or whether simply somehow or other you're instructed not to take it, I don't know. Also, I think the field around their craft and the way they're able to make them invisible if they choose to has a lot to do with it. Some people talk about taking a photo of something that was right there in front of them and it doesn't come out. It's just a blank shot. So who knows?
Have you, in your records from your research work, do you have any really incredible photographs?
We have a number of photographs in our archive, the most notable being the Kaikoura Light sightings, which took place in the late 70s, and they were photographed from an Argosy postal cargo aircraft travelling between our North and South Islands, and they were photographed by an Australian New Zealand film crew. And they're probably the the most notable of lights in the sky, unusual lights moving in a particular manner. But we also do have some photos of craft as well.
So what are, other than, well, first of all, is the human civilization or the Earth civilization the only violent or low consciousness civilization, or the most low consciousness that's out there as far as you know, or do you even know that?
Well, I don't know that because I've only had contact with certain species, but I would imagine Dr. Schild talks about the opposites and how the universe is made up of positive and negative. Everything is made up of positive and negative. So I'm assuming that just as it is reflected on our planet that there's positive and negative and warlike and peaceful, that the same will probably exist elsewhere as well.
Have the beings that you've interacted with given you any impression of what what's the universe like in terms of consciousness? Obviously, there's positive and negative, but as a whole, is it pretty much half and half, or as a whole, is the universe different than what we experience here on Earth?
They haven't actually discussed any of that with me. I've only been able to ascertain that kind of thing from the species that I've had contact with on the craft.
So it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that we are headed in the right direction anyway, even though we still have some struggles to go through and some evolution that needs to happen before we head in the right direction. But just by the fact that people like you and your son and a lot of the generations of children that are out there, we are evolving into a more positive future. Is that, would you agree with that?
I think so, and I think that some of the things we view as tragedies and bad things that are happening, they are our greatest teachers, because they are at this time. There's so many things happening. We're being forced to examine them, and even in amongst the people that I have contact with in my social life, people who once upon a time would never have even considered that UFOs exist or would have disbelieved it are now considering it, are now looking at the evidence, looking at the good, credible evidence that's out there. And I think that as more things happen on the planet, we are being absolutely forced to face ourselves and face what we can do to better our world and our environment. So I have great hope for the future. I agree with you. We've got some gritty bits to go through, I think. But I have faith in humanity in general as an intelligent and potentially compassionate civilization. And my wish and my hope is that we will move in that direction.
Could you, you mentioned at the earlier part of our conversation some of the different websites where people want to find, if they want to find out more about your work and get involved in your research work as well. Could you reiterate some of the different links and also your book?
Yes, our UFO, New Zealand UFO sighting website is www.ufocusnz.org.nz. And my communicator link website is www.communicatorlink.com. And that's where I have several other people, including Dr. Schild, on the website with me who will talk to experiencers on Skype or over email or over phone and talk about their experiences. People can report things to us and tell us what's happening in their lives and link up with us. And my book is The Dual Soul Connection, The Alien Agenda for Human Advancement, and it's available as an Amazon Kindle ebook, or it's available as a paperback from the Communicator Link website.
Well, thank you so much, Susie, for spending time with me today and answering all those questions. I think you've really expanded on the information and knowledge that we have about extraterrestrial beings and contact, and I'll be following your work very closely, and maybe we'll speak again in the future.
Thank you, Ethan. I've enjoyed it, and you're a very good interviewer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Awaken Empowered TV with my special guest, Susie Hansen. Join us next week as we speak with another incredible individual who's standing on the leading edge and changing the world.